Hey everybody, welcome to Rampage Reviews. I'm Rampage. We have 2 books left in the High Republic era. Will the Nihil rise from the shadows and finish the job? Let's dive in. So the book we're talking about today is The Fallen Star, written by Claudia Gray. It takes place in 230 BBY. It immediately follows the events of Tempest Runner, where you find out the origins of Lorna D, how she joined the Nihil, and exactly what happens after she is temporarily captured by the Republic. The Republic is chasing after who they believe to be the Eye of the Nihil, which is Lorna D, but we all know that the Eye of the Nihil is actually Marchion Ro. And Marchion Ro is actually hiding in the shadows, planning a large-scale attack against the Republic. It's one of the largest, most coordinated planned attacks you will probably see in Star Wars history. It's pretty crazy once you get into the story. I really enjoyed the story. So the way the story kind of begins is a lot of the Jedi and a lot of people are on Starlight Beacon, which is the new station that the Republic built. It is above Iram, the planet that was formerly at war with Irano 150 years prior. And currently Stellan Gios is acting as the sheriff of Starlight Beacon because Avar Kriss is actually on the run chasing after Lorna D. She's the one leading that search. So on Starlight Beacon, this is a large station that serves as an emergency services station. It's a medical hub. It's a tourist attraction and also a refuge away from the Nihil when they have been attacking other worlds and other planets in the Outer Rim and in the Mid Rim and the Core Worlds. So Marchion Ro is planning this large-scale attack, and basically he has about 3 phases to this attack. The first phase is planning a lot of attacks with his Tempests on other worlds to try to attack these worlds far away from Starlight Beacon. And what this will do is it'll draw the Jedi and Republic forces to these planets so that they are too far away to try to help Starlight Beacon if they were in any sort of trouble. The second phase of his attack involves a group of individuals that Marchion instructs to board Starlight Beacon, infiltrate it, if you will. They go in basically disguised as like maintenance people, try to blend into the crowd there. What they're actually doing, they're going around sabotaging different parts of the station. They are disabling comms, they are turning off power in certain areas, they are disabling airlock hangar doors, and basically doing anything and everything they can to where if there was any sort of emergency, the Jedi and everybody on the station would have a lot of trouble coordinating any sort of help or resolution to the problem that's on the station. While they're sabotaging the station, the Leveler is actually on their ship. Now this is the large beast from the last couple of books, and it was introduced back in 382 BBY, but we see it all the way up until this point. Marchion Ro met with a contact in the last book to try to uncover the Leveler and use it. And when I say the last book, I mean Rising Storm, not Tempest Runner. He acquires the Leveler, he has it stowed away on this ship, and the ship lands on Starlight Beacon and basically is just meant to sit there for a little bit, but it is released eventually. The cargo that the people riding the ship are stating that they're bringing are Rathtars. I don't know if you remember what Rathtars are, but they were introduced in episode 7 when Han Solo was traveling through space. Rey and Finn come upon him with the Millennium Falcon. He boards, and then he says that he's traveling with Rathtars, and they're just these giant beasts that have these huge mouths with teeth and tentacles, and they attack really fast and they devour you. Basically, no one was going to check if the Leveler was in there, or they weren't going to check if Rathtars were in there. They were going to assume that it was correct because they don't really want to run into that. Now, the third phase of this plan was for that group of individuals to set off a bomb in one part of Starlight Beacon, and it's a bomb that's so powerful it will actually shift Starlight Beacon a little bit, enough to where it will start to travel a little bit, and it also destroys their thrusters, which is what's holding them up and separating them from Iram's gravitational pull. While the station undergoes this movement, it starts to get close to Iram to where it's actually close enough to get pulled in. And what this does is it splits the station in half. It creates a lot of panic and chaos, and the ship eventually just gets pulled in and then drops to the planet. A lot of people perish along the way. Now, while these saboteurs are sabotaging the station, the Leveler is traveling through the station. It's been released at this point, and all the Jedi are feeling it. They're feeling this muffling of the Force. They can't connect to it the way that they could before. It's not extreme like when the Leveler is right next to you and he's about to devour you. It's just very muffled because they're far enough away to where it's not causing this panic of nightmares that they usually experience, but it does disrupt their ability to connect with the Force in a useful way. Everybody's in a panic while different things are failing throughout the entire time. Pilots are unable to get off of Starlight Beacon because the airlock hangar doors are not functioning correctly. They basically have to blast their way out in several different ways. The Rathtars get loose because they're trying to look and see if the source of the muffling of the force is in these ships that were bringing the cargo. They just wanted to make sure the Rathtars were actually in there. They actually found the ship that the leveler was in, realized that nothing was in it. Then they checked the other one to see if that had anything, and it was the Rathtars. So that ended up causing a bunch of chaos. Everybody's trying to fight them off. The Jedi kill a few of them. But eventually, the Nihil do enjoy the destruction of Starlight Beacon. Now, Marchion Ro says that he could have set off a detonation that would have destroyed Starlight Beacon altogether. But what he wanted to do was he wanted it to slowly die. That way, the sequence of events was being recorded and watched by the entire galaxy because he wanted everyone to know the might of the Nihil and what they were capable of. Several Jedi perished along the way. I won't name all of them that perished. Rather, you just read the book so you can kind of see the sequence little by little. It is a really good book. Really enjoyed it. One thing I kind of got while I was reading it was I felt like it would make a really good live action movie or TV show, probably more like a movie. And because of this, I kept thinking of the different action that was taking place in the book. And I was just thinking to myself, wow, if I could see this on screen, and also just so I could visualize everything that's going on, it would just be amazing. I feel like this would be an awesome action movie. And because I was yearning for that, I almost felt like a little dissatisfied because I was like, oh, I really want to see this like really badly. All in all, I'm not going to let that take away from how good of a book it was. It was actually a very, very good book, so I enjoyed it. Things that I found interesting, or will it mesh with Legends? When did the Republic separate from the Outer Rim? Or when did the Outer Rim separate from the Republic? If you remember from episode 1, there was a line in that movie that Shmi Skywalker gave, where Padme was trying to argue with her about how there were anti-slavery laws for the Republic, but then Shmi Skywalker's like, well, the Republic doesn't exist out here. So that was in episode 1, much, much later, 200 years later, in fact. During this, we're seeing this unification between the Outer Rim and the Republic. Did the Outer Rim leave the Republic? Is Tatooine so far in the Outer Rim that the Republic didn't reach that far? That's also possible, but what happened? As stated before, the Rathtars make their return. They were introduced in episode 7, and now we see that they were supposedly upon this cargo in a ship, which actually carried the leveler. But then later on, we find out that there was a ship that had Rathtars on it, and they cause a lot of havoc and chaos. Would definitely love to see that on the big screen. Did you know that a group of huts are called a bulge of huts? First time learning this, but there's actually several different names for collections of things in Star Wars. A remorse of Rathtars, an illumination of Jedi, a grove of Wookiees, or a tinker of droids. These are all really cool, and I enjoyed learning that. 7 hells of the Sith. What does that mean? There's a statement in the book that Stellan makes when he's talking about prisoners aboard Starlight Beacon. It goes, the mention of Avar prompted an odd look from Stellan, but he said only, there's not much you can do for me. Everything is centered here, and 7 hells of the Sith, the prisoners. So obviously it's like a, hell, type of statement. What does that refer to? Is there something that is lore around the Sith that is trying to be introduced that suggests that there is mythology or lore surrounding different levels of hell? And actually we learned that hell was a mythological place that symbolized an unpleasant afterlife, and it was of Corellian mythology. So now you have that being mixed with the 7 hells of the Sith. I would like to know more about this and where that phrase came from. I had to go back to see this one, but the Nihil feel like they're an extreme continuation of the Path of the Open Hand. Even though the Path of the Open Hand was a very extreme organization, the Nihil obviously are proving to be extremely extreme. The statement goes like this. That was only the first wave of our efforts, the Cloud Leader snapped. This wave is about sending a message to the Jedi. From now on, they'll know this is about them. So the Nihil actually have a vendetta against the Jedi, which I imagine that involves their goal of striking fear in the Republic, of taking control of the Outer Rim, of trying to take control of the Mid-Rim and the Core Worlds, and basically flex their might against the powers that be so they can try to live the way they want to live. That's what they always try and say. They are striking specifically at the Jedi, and especially with the release of the Leveler on the Starlight Beacon, you kind of see that they have a disdain for the Jedi, which we know from 382 BBY, the Path of the Open Hand had a large disdain for the Jedi because the Jedi use the Force and manipulate the Force, and the Path of the Open Hand doesn't believe that you should be doing that. They believe the Force shall be free. You shouldn't be using the Force. You don't have any right. You don't have the moral authority to do that. That's what they believe. Tree Kai Karai. In the last book, there was a nursery rhyme that described the Leveler. It seemed to describe the Leveler because it ended with "all you will be is dust" or something like that. Well, Stellan is starting to see nightmares and horrific images, and he's succumbing to the effects of the Leveler. And while he's doing that, while he's seeing seeing these extreme things in his head, he actually hears that song going on in his head. So obviously this song is known throughout the galaxy to different people, and it actually has great meaning to some people who know who the leveler or what the leveler is. It feels like in the next book we're actually going to get to see maybe the origin of the leveler and more information about the purpose and just the backstory of this beast, which very interesting beast to be introduced. Why does the leveler only affect Force users? Why doesn't it affect non-Force users? I asked this because if you remember that George has given some interviews about who can use the Force, who can become a Jedi, who's capable of that, and his answer has always been, well, anyone can do it. It just depends on how much you want it, how much you're going to practice at it, how much time you're going to dedicate to it. So because the Force flows through everything and everyone, and anyone can use the Force and manipulate the Force and practice to become a Jedi, technically anyone could be a Force user. So you would think because of that, the leveler would affect them. However, I did kind of think out loud about this, and I decided these people aren't actively connected to the Force the way the Jedi are, and they are always connected to the Force because they use that to try to feel their surroundings, try to be aware of everything around them. So because of that, since they're always so actively connected to the will of the Force, this is what creates this nauseating feeling, this hallucinations, these visions and feelings that are so damaging to their psyche, because the leveler is basically able to take their connection and pervert it in some way. That's kind of what the purpose of this beast seems to be. Starlight Beacon being this close to Irem seems like it'd be a safety hazard. I don't know why they thought this was a good idea. It feels like if you're going to have a station like that, it would make more sense to have it a much more proximity away from the planet, so that way in case something were to happen, if something flied into it, it wouldn't just descend into the gravitational pull of Irem. The blast that took place in the book was just enough to shift it barely to where it reached the gravitational pull of Irem relatively quickly, which means it had to have been very close to that gravitational field, which means some engineer made some very poor planning and should probably be fired. Couldn't the Jedi simply just close themselves off from the Force to not succumb to the effects of the leveler? This kind of goes back to what I was saying before about how non-Force users aren't affected by the leveler the same way that Jedi are. We also see in the book that Elzar is closing off his connection to the Force because of the way he's trying to recover from the fact that he reached to the dark side of the Force in the Rising Storm to fight off some people on Valo. So because he was so afraid to reach into that place again, he was trying to close himself off so he could kind of do some ad hoc therapy, if you will. But because he was closing himself off so much, he kept mentioning to people that he's not affected as much as everybody else is. So why couldn't a Jedi just shut themselves off from the Force temporarily to find the leveler and then act to try to damage or disable it in some way? A possible explanation to this could be that the Jedi are so used to being connected to the Force that it would arise as almost a reflex to them, to where they have no ability to just shut it off completely because they are so used to using it. They're so dependent on it that they can't just shut it off at will, especially if they're in danger. They will reach for it immediately because that's their reflex. Stellan Gios kind of alludes to this in the book by saying that he doesn't feel that he's anyone if he doesn't have command of the Force and if he's not a part of the Council. He feels like his connection to the Council and to the Force, being a Jedi, is the only thing that identifies him, which he has a problem with. Starlight Beacon must be massive in this book, because you will notice there's a lot of different times that people are setting off explosions within there to create space to allow ships to try to escape, to try to access different parts of the station for various reasons. And there's a lot of these explosions going off, and never once, or at least not very often, do you hear of atmospheric depressurization being a problem in the station. You would think that would be a problem immediately. This leads me to believe that Starlight Beacon must be gigantic, because if they're setting off this many explosions and there's not depressurization at least a few times while they're doing it without actually intentionally doing it, it must be as big as the Death Star. That's kind of what it feels like. Could a suit hamper your connection to the Force? It doesn't seem like it could. Vader wore a suit almost his entire adult life after he had his limbs sliced off by Obi-Wan Kenobi. So it didn't seem like it hampered his abilities then. Elzar Mann actually dons a spacesuit in the book, and he describes the feeling of being in the spacesuit as another muffling of the Force. It felt like he couldn't connect to it as well as he could when he didn't have the suit on. So he felt like it hampered him more to try to do what he needed to do, was open up these doors and get ships to escape out of Starlight Beacon while the Rathtars are attacking them. But he describes the suit as hampering his ability to use the Force. So it's weird that we see that, but then Vader effortlessly could use the Force while in a suit of his own. This could also be because Vader is just crazy strong, which is also a possibility. Lina So seems to be overstating this just a little bit. This is a disaster. Chancellor Lina So leaned heavily against the Targons on either side of her. Hollows showing the broadcasts of and reactions to Starlight's descent on a dozen different worlds were projected around her. The greatest disaster for the Republic in a century, perhaps more. So far, she thought, but was not morbid enough to add, we can't get anyone there faster? So Starlight Beacon is being destroyed in front of everyone's eyes because it's being recorded, basically. And she suggests that this is the greatest disaster in over a century, even though you just had the Great Hyperspace Disaster 3 books ago, and which is literally like 3 years ago, which involved a ship being spliced in hyperspace and having all of its parts being splattered throughout the galaxy and hitting random worlds and causing billions, trillions of Republic credits of damage, killing off billions and trillions of people. That wasn't a bigger disaster than one station being destroyed and landing on a planet. Pull yourself together, Chancellor, okay? Seriously. That does it for my interesting thoughts. Judging by the things that I described here, I don't believe I saw anything that would cause it to not mesh with Legends in a real way or be able to pull anything from Legends while conflicting with something. If you feel like I made a mistake in that respect, leave a comment, let me know, and I'll address it on the next video. So a rating for the book, I was struggling with this because I feel like I'm being really generous to the High Republic era, specifically the 232 BBY era and around that time, but also with Cataclysm, which is an amazing book, 382 BBY. I am going to give this an 8.8, not in the 9s. It didn't knock my socks off, but it was a really awesome book. It was greatly told. I hope it does get into live action. I'm excited for the Acolyte coming out. I don't know if it's going to tie into these books in any way. I feel like the Nihil will probably still be presented in that series, so that'll be pretty interesting to see that in live action. And after this, we only got one more book in the High Republic era. There was one book that was written after this next book I'm going to read, and it takes place in 200 BBY, but it was only released in China, and I believe it's only in Chinese. You can't get it in English, so I couldn't even find it where to buy it. So we're going to skip that one, and next after that, we are on to Darth Plagueis. So we're getting closer and closer to episode 1 in the Skywalker saga. There is a ton of content that takes place in that time, especially between 30 and 20 BBY around the Clone Wars and stuff like that. Then you get into episode 1, 2, and 3. It's going to get really interesting, and especially seeing the canon books that were written. It's just literally, it's canon, then Legends, then canon, then Legends. It goes back and forth quite a bit, and I'm going to keep them all chronological, so that way I can keep trying to compare the two and say, can we bring more Legends stuff into canon? It'd just be cool to see. So with that being said, if you enjoyed the content that you saw today, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. If you wanted to purchase this book, there will be a link in the description. Be aware that I am an Amazon affiliate, so if you use this link to buy the book, I will benefit in some way. This channel will benefit in some way. Don't do it just to benefit the channel. Do it so we can continue the conversation of Star Wars, because that's what we love, right? So may the Force be with you, and you have a great day. I'll see you in the next video. Thank you.